Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Minecraft Disney World. Here we are outside of the Seven Dwarves Mine Train, but we're not going to actually be covering the Seven Dwarves Mine Train. We're going to be covering an attraction that used to be where this is now, and that of course is the famous 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Now, like most attractions at Walt Disney World, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea sort of has a history in Disneyland before it came over to Disney World. In Disneyland, there was an attraction called the Submarine Voyage, which opened in 1959 and was very similar in style and theming to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Of course, the names were different. Other differences like the ride vehicles existed, and the basis of it was quite different, but as far as, you know, the theme of the ride went, it was pretty similar. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea ran from October of 1971 to September of 1994, so it had a pretty long life span, but it eventually ended up getting closed. The ride, if you've never been on it, is essentially a faux submarine ride. You'd get into this submarine called the Nautilus, which is, you know, based on the live-action movie that Disney produced called 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And you would actually dive underwater, and you would go on this tour underneath the sea, and you would see all sorts of exotic sea life and find yourself in peril as you're attacked by a giant octopus, and then you'd have to escape. I think it was a squid. And it was around for quite a long time. Now, the vehicle, like I said, was based on the Nautilus from the live-action movie. It was designed by Harper Goff, the movie version, and then the Imagineer George McGinnis designed the vehicle version for the ride, and it weighed 40 tons. So we're talking about, like, you know, big rides here. This isn't like your Haunted Mansion Doom Buggy. They weren't actually submarines, technically. They were really boats that were just covered up, and they sat below the water level. And each sub, there were 12 of them, each sub sat 40 people. So while it seems like a lot, surprisingly, that turned out to cause a very low amount of turnaround between rides, which, you know, is of course a big important factor when it comes to, you know, measuring the success of an attraction at any of the Disney theme parks. The tops were always sticking out just a little bit, which is why I say they weren't a submarine. They didn't fully submerge underneath the water. And you'd get on this boat, and each guest on the Nautilus would have a seat, and you'd have a little porthole that you could look out to see all of the ocean. And above that porthole would be a speaker, and you would hear the narration by Captain Nemo. And there was also this cool little thing. There was a button that was supposed to defog the window, since, you know, sometimes it would fog up with all the condensation, but of course it barely ever worked, so it kind of sort of acted more like a placebo effect than anything else. The diving effect was actually a visual effect that was created with a bunch of bubble machines like throughout the ride, and then they would use all of the bubbles that were churned up through a waterfall hitting the space above the ride in the lagoon. It sort of created this idea that you were moving underneath the ocean and really gave people this sense that you were diving deep within the water, when in reality you were just a couple of feet, you know, below the water level. So here's the deal. You have this really popular ride, so popular that it was sent over from Disneyland to Disney World, and they built a version over there. It's based on a popular Disney movie. People love it, but why did it close? Well, it closed for many reasons, and there's some of those reasons are more official than other reasons. There are some rumors that go around about what caused it to close. The most likely is that ultimately it cost a lot to maintain. From an operational standpoint, maintaining the submarines, keeping the lagoon clean was a very costly and time-consuming project. And then on top of that, seating 40 people per boat and then sending them out in groups of 3 boats, you weren't getting a lot of guests going through the ride at a regular basis. And again, once Disney sort of abandoned that concept of paying for tickets to ride and, you know, being able to ride whatever you want, the idea of having a ride that could churn out people a lot was very appealing to the Disney company. Look at Spaceship Earth, one of the most popular rides in Disney World, and part of the reason is because of that location matched with the ride vehicle just sort of allows it to just pump out people at a constant pace. There is no stopping. So these sort of combinations caused it to unofficially close down in 1994 in September. They had said it was for a temporary maintenance period, but then it just never reopened again. And then finally in 1996, they officially announced that it was going to be a permanent closure. Unfortunately, most of the submarines were just buried in a landfill in 2004. They ended up saving 3 of them. 2 of them they sent over to Castaway Cay, which is the island that Disney owns down in, I believe, the Bahamas for their cruises, and they were submerged underneath, and they had all this coral life grow over it, so it looked like a naturally sunken submarine. And then one of them has been stored in Disney's Hollywood Studios, and you can actually see it in the backlot tours next to some Star Wars and Pirates of the Caribbean props. And then so when it closed, they just basically left the giant lagoon there, and they left it as sort of a scenic area called Ariel's Grotto. They added a King Triton statue, and then in 2004, they drained out all the water, and they sort of demolished it, and they put in its place Pooh's Playful Spot, and that operated from 2005 to 2010, so for 5 years it was Pooh's Playful Spot, and then they eventually closed that down to build what we see in front of us today, the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, which is part of this expansion here. One really interesting story to tell about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Personally, I've never ridden it, or at least I have no recollection of riding it. I might have been on it when I was too young to remember, but I have no sort of personal history with the ride. But I remember reading in Disney War and elsewhere this interesting theory that the operators at Disney World were so happy to see the ride closed that they sort of went out of the way to make sure it stayed closed. Now, again, this is all rumor. This has never been officially confirmed. This, for all we know, is completely made up. But as the story goes, when Michael Ovitz, who at that time was the president of Disney, joined up with the company, he wanted to get familiarized with the parks and the going-ons with the parks, and he had been reading all of these complaints from big fans of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea as to why it was closed down. And he wanted to know why it was closed down, and they assured him that it was because it was expensive, and it was hard to maintain, and it just wasn't really good for them. And he insisted on going down there and trying the ride himself. And as the story goes, they got pretty much everything lined up so that it could be as awful of a ride experience for him as possible to convince him that it was, in fact, better to just keep the ride closed. And this ranges from, getting the person who could give him the rockiest ride on the tracks to even the implication that they took a bucket of water and they poured it into the sub to make it look like it had a worse leak than it really would have had. To make it seem like these were run-down subs, and along with the fact of picking the worst sub out of the entire fleet, so it just didn't look that great, and using, poor sound quality and all of this stuff to just sort of rig it to make it look like the ride was in complete disrepair. And at the end of it, he supposedly got off the ride and totally agreed that it was the right decision to keep it closed, and the operations people at Disney got exactly what they wanted, which was the closure of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Now, is that true? Who knows? It could be. I could see that happening, but I could also see that it's just from a logistical standpoint was a better idea to close it down. Although I would question, if that were the case, why didn't they immediately put something else up in its place? Who knows? We may never know. But there you have it. It's just a short, quick look to a ride that I think is often mentioned when talking about the history of Walt Disney World, but may not be remembered by most, especially the younger crowd today, considering it, saw its last ride in 1994, which is, 20 years ago to this year, which is crazy. I hope you enjoy this. I'm going to be doing more of this where I go and I check out the history of attractions that are no longer there because, while they may not be there anymore, they still have a really rich history. I want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I have a bunch of other Disney Minecraft videos, including a weekly Q&A, a top 5 that I do with one of my friends, a revisiting series where I go to each attraction and I talk about what I would do to them to make them better attractions, and other various videos just like that. Anyway, I'm at Rob Plays on Twitter. I hope you all have a fantastic week. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you all next time for the next episode of Minecraft Disney.